My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 65 years old, and my daughter-in-law told me I'd only stop shaming our family when I died. Before I tell you how that single sentence led to a divorce, a courtroom battle over custody, and uncovered a shocking crime, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Pause. For the past 10 years since my dear husband Richard passed, my world has been small, but it has been happy. I live in a quiet, cozy apartment in Columbus, Ohio, the same city I've called home for 40 years. My life revolved around two things: the memories of a wonderful marriage, and the future I saw in my only son, Michael, and his two beautiful children, my grandchildren, Leo and Chloe. As a retired elementary school teacher, I've always believed that a foundation of love and honesty is the most important inheritance you can give your family. I thought I had provided that. I truly did. The evening it all came crashing down was my 65th birthday. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, had insisted on celebrating at La Trattoria, a new flashy Italian restaurant downtown. It was the kind of place with tablecloths so white you were afraid to touch them and wine glasses so delicate they looked like they'd shatter if you breathed on them too hard. It wasn't my kind of place. I would have been happier with a simple barbecue in Michael's backyard, but Jessica loved appearances. She thrived on them. From the moment we sat down, the air was thick with attention only I seemed to feel. Michael, bless his heart, was just happy to be celebrating. He was a good son, a hard worker in construction management, but he had a blind spot when it came to his wife. He saw her ambition as drive. I saw it as a relentless, gnawing hunger for more. Eleanor, you should really think about getting some new curtains for your apartment, Jessica said, swirling a ridiculously expensive Pinot Noir in her glass. The ones you have are quaint. A bit dated. Michael shot her a warning look. Jess, her curtains are fine. She just smiled, that bright, polished smile that never, ever reached her calculating blue eyes. I'm just saying. We want her to have nice things. I just picked at my salad, the lettuce feeling like sawdust in my mouth. For 3 years it had been like this. A constant barrage of small, cutting remarks disguised as helpful suggestions. Comments about my clothes, my car, the way I styled my hair. Each one was a tiny paper cut. Insignificant on its own, but together they had left me bleeding emotionally. I endured it all for Michael and the kids. I told myself it was just her way, that she didn't mean any harm. But tonight something felt different. There was an edge to her voice, a glint in her eye that made the hair on my arms stand up. The main courses arrived, and Michael started telling a funny story about a subcontractor on his latest project. He was so animated, his laugh lines crinkling around his eyes. He looked so much like his father in that moment. As he spoke, I saw Jessica's gaze drift towards me. Her smile had vanished. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was so nakedly hostile that it stole my breath. I'm just going to run to the restroom quickly, Michael said, placing his napkin on the table and excusing himself. The second he was out of earshot, Jessica's entire demeanor shifted. The mask of the perfect, charming daughter-in-law fell away completely. She leaned across the table, her voice a venomous whisper that cut through the restaurant's cheerful noise. You know, Eleanor, she hissed, the words slithering out from between her perfectly glossed lips. You'll only stop bringing shame to this family when you die. The words hit me like a physical blow. Shame? What shame? The shame of living in a modest apartment? The shame of driving a 10-year-old car? The shame of being a widow who lived a quiet life? For 3 years I had swallowed her insults, absorbed her condescension, and funded her lifestyle in secret, all in the name of peace. But this was a declaration of war. Something inside me, a part of me that I thought had died with Richard, suddenly snapped. The years of quiet suffering, of feeling like a burden, of being treated like a walking, talking ATM machine with inconvenient feelings, it all came to a boil. A strange calm washed over me. The tremor in my hands stopped. The lump in my throat dissolved. I looked her dead in the eye, and for the first time in 3 years I didn't look away. I didn't even raise my voice. I let a small cold smile touch my lips. Let's see how you manage without the secret payments I make to you every month. The color drained from Jessica's face. The smug superiority vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. And at that exact moment Michael returned to the table, a smile on his face. But the smile froze as he saw the look on his wife's face and the cold fury in mine. He didn't just hear the tail end of my sentence. He felt the chilling words hanging in the air between us. He stopped dead in his tracks, his gaze flicking from me to Jessica and back again. The cheerful mood was shattered, replaced by a deafening silence. He slowly walked to his chair, his movements stiff. He didn't sit down. He placed his hands on the back of the chair, his knuckles turning white. Then with a sudden violent motion, he reached down and slammed his fork onto his plate. The sharp clang of metal against ceramic made a woman at the next table jump. He looked past me, his eyes locked on his wife, his voice low and dangerous. What secret payments? The silence that followed Michael's question was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and cheerful chatter out of our corner of the restaurant. Jessica's face, which had been a mask of panic just a second before, twisted into a frantic, unconvincing smile. She let out a high-pitched, brittle laugh. "Oh honey, you know your mother. She's got such a sense of humor. She's just teasing me." She reached across the table trying to pat my hand, but I pulled it away as if her touch were a hot coal. "It didn't sound like a joke, Jess," Michael said, his voice dangerously quiet. He still hadn't moved, his body coiled like a spring. "Well, she's been a little forgetful lately," Jessica said, her eyes darting between us. She even had the audacity to give a little patronizing tap to her own temple. "We were talking about a birthday gift, and I think she's just gotten her wires crossed." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it was almost impressive. She was trying to gaslight both of us, right there in public, painting me as a confused old woman. The Eleanor of yesterday might have faltered, might have even played along to keep the peace. But the woman sitting there now was different. That woman was done being silent. "I am not confused, Jessica," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "And I am not joking." I didn't look at her. I looked at my son. I saw the confusion warring with a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He wanted to believe his wife, but my tone, my stillness told him this was real. "Mom, what is going on?" he pleaded, his gaze now fixed on me. I didn't answer him with words. I slid my purse into my lap, took out my phone, and with fingers that were surprisingly steady, I unlocked it. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs, but on the outside I was a statue of calm. I tapped open my banking app, navigated to the transfer history, and turned the screen to face my son. The light from the phone illuminated his face, casting strange shadows. He leaned in. I watched him read. I saw his eyes scan the lines once, twice. I saw the exact moment the numbers registered. "Recurring transfer to Jessica Vance," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Amount, $2,500. Frequency, monthly." He scrolled down with a shaking thumb. October 2022. November 2022. December. His voice trailed off as he kept scrolling. A testament to 3 years of secret transactions. "What is this?" he finally asked, looking up from the screen. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a horrifying disbelief. "This has to be a mistake." "It's no mistake," I said softly. $2,500. On the 15th of every month. For the last 36 months. I did the math in my head, the final number landing with the force of a physical blow. "That's $90,000, Michael." He sank into his chair as if his legs had given out. He stared at Jessica, who was now as white as the tablecloth. $90,000, he stammered. The private school tuition for Leo and Chloe. The down payment on Jessica's gleaming white SUV. The family vacation to Disney World last summer that I wasn't invited on because it was too much walking for me. The expensive summer camps. The designer clothes she paraded on social media. It all flashed through my mind, and I could see on Michael's face that he was making the same devastating connections. "Michael, it's not what you think," Jessica said, her voice high and strained. "Your mother," she insisted. "She said she was lonely and had all this money from the inheritance after your father died. She said it made her feel useful, a part of the family. It was a gift. I was doing her a favor by accepting it." The cruelty of that statement, twisting my love into a transaction and my grief into her personal slush fund, was staggering. Michael just shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. A $90,000 favor? The air crackled. The argument was no longer mine. It was theirs. I knew I needed to leave. I slowly gathered my purse and my coat. "Mom, wait," Michael said, his voice cracking. "No, Michael," I said, looking at him with all the love and sorrow I felt. "This is between you and your wife now." I placed my hand on his shoulder for a moment. "I love you." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I could feel Jessica's panicked glare burning into my back. As I pushed open the heavy glass door of the restaurant and stepped into the cool night air, the sound of their raised voices finally reached me. A muffled, angry roar. I thought cutting off the money was the end of it. I was so wrong. It was only the beginning of the nightmare. The drive home was a blur. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. When I got back to my quiet apartment, the silence was deafening. I made myself a cup of tea, but it grew cold on the table as I just sat there, staring at the wall, the scene from the restaurant replaying in my mind on a loop. I didn't sleep a wink that night. My phone started buzzing at 7 a.m. It was Jessica. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. A string of frantic texts followed. "We need to talk. You've created a huge misunderstanding. Michael is furious and it's your fault." I deleted them without reading past the first few words. Then just after 9 Michael called. I hesitated for a moment, my heart aching for him, before I answered. "Mom." His voice was hoarse, broken. Can I come over?" "Of course, honey," I said softly. "I'm here." When he arrived 20 minutes later, he looked like a ghost. His face was ashen, with dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there the night before. He was still wearing the same clothes from my birthday dinner, now wrinkled and slept in. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. He sank onto my sofa and put his head in his hands. I made him a cup of coffee and sat in the armchair opposite him, waiting for him to speak. "I didn't know, Mom," he said finally, his voice muffled by his hands. "I swear to God I had no idea." "I know you didn't, Michael," I said gently. He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and confusion. "But I should have. I should have known something was wrong. Every time I tried to talk about our budget, about where the money was going, she'd turn it around on me." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of distress I knew from his childhood. She'd say I was trying to control her. She'd pull out these complicated spreadsheets she made and say things like, "See? It's all accounted for." It was all just numbers and columns that didn't make sense to me. She'd say I was just a builder, and she was better with finances. She made me feel stupid, Mom. Incompetent. After a while, I just gave up asking. I trusted her. I thought I was letting her handle something she was good at so I could focus on my work, on providing. My heart broke for him. It wasn't just deceit. It was a calculated campaign of emotional manipulation. She had eroded his confidence to ensure he would never look too closely at her house of cards. "It wasn't your fault," I said firmly. "She planned this." "How did it start?" he asked, his voice raw. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the first time 3 years ago. Jessica had called me in tears, saying they were going to have to pull Leo out of his preschool because they couldn't make the tuition payment that month. My heart had gone out to them. Of course I'd help. I offered to cover it for a few months until Michael's promotion came through. She was so grateful. I recalled, the memory now tasting like poison. She cried, said I was a saint. And then she said the most clever, toxic thing of all. "Please don't tell Michael. His pride would be so hurt. Just send it to my account and I'll handle it. It'll be our little secret." Michael flinched as if he'd been struck. That one-time payment became the monthly tuition. Then it became tuition plus the cost of new school supplies. Then came Sarah's ballet classes, Leo's soccer league fees, a new transmission for her car, a desperately needed weekend getaway for her and Michael. The requests were always framed around the children's happiness or a family emergency. I stood up and walked to my desk drawer. I pulled out a simple manila folder. It wasn't thick, but it felt heavy. "I started keeping records about a year ago," I said, my voice quiet. Something just didn't feel right. I felt like I was losing my mind, so I started printing things out. I handed him the folder. Inside were printouts of text message conversations, emails, each one a request for money, wrapped in layers of emotional manipulation. Chloe will be heartbroken if she's the only girl who can't go on the ballet trip. Leo's coach says he has real talent, but we can't afford the private lessons he needs. I know it's a lot to ask, but this is for the kid's future. He read through them, his breath catching in his throat. He saw the lies, the patterns, the way she had used my love for my grandchildren as a weapon against me. His face, already pale, turned a shade of gray. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each one. But there was one document in that folder, tucked near the back, that even I hadn't fully understood the significance of. Not until it was almost too late. Michael stopped at a page near the back of the folder. It wasn't a printout of a text message or an email. It was a photocopy of a formal document. He pulled it out, his brow furrowed in confusion. I moved to look over his shoulder. It was a loan application. "What's this?" he asked, his voice tight. I peered at it. Jessica sent me a picture of that about 6 months ago. She said it was some paperwork for refinancing the car, and that she needed me to co-sign because her credit was a little shaky. I told her I wasn't comfortable doing that and she dropped it. I just printed the picture she sent as a record of another thing she'd asked for. But Michael was looking at it with the trained eye of a man who deals with contracts every day. He pointed a trembling finger at the bottom of the page. "Mom, that's not an application. It's a finalized loan agreement. From a high-interest lender I've never even heard of. For $15,000. My blood ran cold. "What? No, that can't be right." I told her no. "Look at the signature line," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He traced the scrawled name on the cosigner line. It was my name, Eleanor Vance. The signature was a near-perfect imitation of my own. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had to grip the back of the armchair to steady myself. "I never signed that," I said, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. "Michael, I never ever signed that." He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw the last vestiges of his denial crumble into dust, replaced by a cold, hard fury. "The date on this agreement," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's from the same week she made the down payment on the SUV." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The refinancing paperwork was a lie. My refusal hadn't stopped her. She had taken my name, my identity, and forged my signature to secure a loan. She hadn't just been emotionally manipulating me. She had committed a crime. She had committed fraud. The loan was for emergency home repairs. Michael read from the form, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping his lips. The only emergency was that she wanted a new car with heated leather seats. He carefully placed the document back in the folder, his movements precise and deliberate. He stood up, and he was no longer the broken man who had walked into my apartment an hour ago. He was a man with a purpose, a terrifyingly calm purpose. "I have to go home," he said. "Michael, be careful," I pleaded. "Don't worry, Mom," he said, looking at me with an intensity one hadn't seen since his father died. "I'm done being careful." The story of what happened next, he told me later that night over the phone. He said he walked into their house and found Jessica on the phone, laughing with one of her friends. When she saw his face, her laughter died in her throat. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply walked over to her, took the phone from her hand, said, "She'll have to call you back," and ended the call. He placed the folder on their granite kitchen island, the one I had paid for. He opened it directly to the forged loan document. "Explain this," he said. According to Michael, she tried to lie for about 30 seconds, but his cold, unwavering stare broke her. Her defenses collapsed, and the entitled rage underneath was unleashed. "Fine," she screamed. "I did it. So what? I deserve nice things. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to drive a 5-year-old car to the kid's private school? Do you know what the other mothers drive? So you committed a felony?" he asked, his voice still dangerously calm. "You forged my mother's name? You stole from her. It's not stealing if she has plenty of money. She's an old woman living alone. What else is she going to spend it on?" And then Michael said he asked the question that blew the whole thing wide open. "Besides the $90,000 you took from my mother, And the $15,000 you took with her name, how much other debt are we in, Jessica? That's when the real truth came out. It wasn't just my money she'd been burning through. She pulled out a stack of credit card statements she'd been hiding in her closet. One after another he saw them. Balances of $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Store cards, gas cards, major credit cards. All maxed out. All with crippling interest rates. The grand total, not including their mortgage, was over $120,000. Michael told me it felt like the floor had just dropped out from beneath him. He had been living in a complete fiction. A financial fantasy world built on his mother's love and a web of high-interest debt. All while his wife told him he was incompetent. He looked at her, standing there amidst the evidence of her deception, and he didn't see his wife anymore. He saw a stranger. "I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow morning, Jessica," he said. "For a divorce." Her rage turned to panicked tears. "You can't. What about the kids? What will people say? You should have thought of that before you decided to defraud my mother and bankrupt our family," he replied. And then her desperation turned ugly. She lunged forward, her face twisted in a snarl. She screamed that if he dared to leave her, she would destroy me. She would tell everyone I was a manipulative old woman trying to break up their marriage. She would make sure I never saw my grandchildren again. And looking into her eyes, he said, he knew she meant it. The real war had just begun. The week that followed was a blur of tense phone calls, meetings with lawyers and sleepless nights. Michael filed for divorce and for emergency temporary custody, citing the financial fraud and Jessica's instability. She was served the papers and, as expected, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. She moved out to stay with a friend, but her presence lingered like a poison in the air. I tried to create a pocket of normalcy for my grandchildren. Their world had been turned upside down. They were confused and scared. They knew Mommy and Daddy were fighting, but they didn't understand why Mommy wasn't home anymore. My heart ached for them. So on that bright, crisp Saturday morning, I did what any grandmother would do. I took Leo to his soccer game. I sat on the cold aluminum bleachers, a thermos of hot chocolate beside me, and for the first time in a long time I just felt normal. I was just a grandma, cheering for her grandson. I watched Leo, his face a mask of fierce concentration, chase the ball down the field. He was a good little player, fast and determined. Several of the other parents and grandparents smiled and waved. One of them, a kind woman named Sarah whose grandson was on the team, came and sat by me. "It's so good to see you here, Eleanor," she said warmly. "Jessica always told us you were too frail to sit through the games." I felt a familiar sting of anger, but I pushed it down. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, forcing a smile. We were chatting about the team's chances this season when I saw a man in a suit walking along the sideline, looking at the parents on the bleachers. His eyes found me, and he started walking purposefully in our direction. I recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Davison, the principal of Leo and Chloe's private school. A cold dread washed over me. Why was he here? "Mrs. Vance," he said, his expression polite but serious. "Forgive me for interrupting, but could I have a word with you in private?" My mind raced. What could this possibly be about? Sarah gave me a curious look as I excused myself and followed Mr. Davison towards the school building that bordered the field. My hands felt clammy. He led me into his quiet, empty office. The silence was unnerving. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I'm very sorry to have to bring this up, especially on a Saturday, but we received a rather concerning phone call this morning." "A phone call?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he said, looking down at a note on his desk. "It was an anonymous caller. A woman. She claimed to be a concerned parent. She said that Leo Vance's grandmother had been seen around the school recently and was exhibiting, she used the words, erratic behavior. She claimed you were making some of the other children uncomfortable, and that the school should look into whether you were a stable presence for your grandson." I just stared at him. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. This was Jessica's next move. She couldn't attack me financially anymore, so she was attacking my character, my reputation. She was trying to paint me as a crazy, potentially dangerous old woman to isolate me from my grandchildren's world completely. She was trying to get me banned from the school grounds. For a moment I couldn't speak. The humiliation was a hot flash crawling up my neck. Then the anger came cold and clear. "Mr. Davison," I said, my voice shaking slightly but firm. "My name is Eleanor Vance. My son, Michael Vance, is currently in the process of divorcing his wife, Jessica. The woman who made that phone call, I can assure you, was Jessica herself." I took a deep breath and laid it all out. I didn't get hysterical. I simply told him the truth, fact by fact. The secret payments. The lies. The forged loan document. I told him about the divorce proceedings and Jessica's threats to keep me away from the children. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, there was a long silence. "Frankly, Mrs. Vance," he said finally, leaning forward, "this, unfortunately, makes a certain amount of sense." He sighed. "Last week, Mrs. Vance, Jessica came to my office. She tried to inform us that this semester's tuition, which is past due, would be paid for by a newly established educational trust fund set up by you. When our finance department asked for the documentation, she became evasive. Your explanation clarifies that situation." I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy. He believed me. "The call was malicious and baseless," he continued, his tone now firm. "And it will be disregarded. You are and always will be welcome on this campus, Mrs. Vance. I am truly sorry you were subjected to this." I thanked him, my voice thick with emotion. As I walked back to the soccer field, the bright sunshine felt a little warmer. I had won this battle. But as I sat back down on the bleachers, a chilling thought entered my mind. I watched my grandson score a goal, the other parents cheering around me, but the joy was tainted by a cold fear. Jessica wasn't just fighting for money anymore. She was fighting to erase me completely. The failed attempt to have me banned from the school only seemed to make Jessica more desperate and more vicious. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, and Michael's lawyer was confident. They had the forged loan document, which was a trump card. They had years of bank statements. They had a mountain of evidence of Jessica's financial deception. In response, Jessica's lawyer was trying to paint a picture of Michael as a neglectful, work-obsessed husband and me as a meddling, controlling mother-in-law who had poisoned my son against his loving wife. It was a disgusting, infuriating lie. Because she couldn't get to me in person, she started a campaign of harassment by text. Michael and I had both blocked her number, but she was devious. She started using those burner phone apps, the ones that give you a new, untraceable number every time. The messages would come at all hours, from area codes I didn't recognize. First, they were manipulative. "The children are asking for me. They're crying every night. Is this what you wanted, Eleanor? Are you happy now that you've broken up our family?" Then they became pleading. "I made a mistake. I know I did. But I love Michael. I love my kids. Don't do this to us. We can fix this. Just stop the divorce proceedings." When we didn't respond, the tone shifted again, becoming sharp and accusatory. "You have no idea what it's like. You sit in your quiet little apartment with your dead husband's money. You never had to struggle. You've always had it easy. You just couldn't stand to see someone else happy." I tried to ignore them. I deleted them as soon as they came in. But they were like little drops of poison seeping under my skin. Michael's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, told us to save every single one as evidence of harassment. The worst one came late on a Tuesday night. I was in my kitchen getting a glass of water before bed. My phone buzzed on the counter. A new number. I almost deleted it without looking, but my morbid curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The message was long, a rambling tirade of hate. But it was the last sentence that made my knees go weak. It was the sentence that crossed a line from which there was no return. "You are a selfish, bitter, jealous old woman. No wonder your husband died. He probably did it just to get away from you." I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the linoleum floor. The words echoed in my head. A vile, venomous scream. Richard. My Richard. The kind, gentle man I had loved for 40 years. The man who had held my hand through sickness and health. The man whose loss was still a raw, open wound in my soul. To use him, to defile his memory like that, it was an act of pure evil. I sank into a kitchen chair, my body trembling. Tears I didn't know I had left to cry streamed down my face. It was a low blow designed for maximum pain, and it had hit its mark perfectly. I must have sat there for half an hour just shaking when I heard a key in my front door. It was Michael. He'd been working late and had promised to stop by to check on me. He walked in, saw the look on my face, and was at my side in an instant. "Mom? What's wrong? What happened?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed a shaking finger at my phone on the floor. He picked it up. The screen was still lit up with her hateful words. I watched his face as he read it. I saw his expression shift from confusion to disbelief, and then to a rage so profound it was terrifying to witness. His whole body went rigid. The color drained from his face, replaced by a dark, dangerous flush. "Give me your phone," he said, his voice a low growl. "Michael, don't," I whispered. "It's what she wants." A reaction. "I don't care what she wants," he said, his voice shaking with fury. He gently took the phone from my hand. His thumbs moved with a furious speed across the screen. He wasn't texting her from the burner number. He was texting her real number, the one he knew she still checked obsessively. He showed me what he wrote. "This is Michael. I just read the message you sent to my mother. You will not contact her again. Ever. Every text you send is being saved for the court. The next one will be used to file a restraining order. Leave her alone. You have done enough damage." He hit send. And then he did something he hadn't done since he was a little boy. He wrapped his arms around me and pulled me into a fierce, protective hug, and just held me while I cried. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry I brought this person into our lives." In that moment, holding my son, I knew she had lost. She had tried to isolate me, to break me down with her cruelty. But all she had done was forge a bond between my son and me that was now stronger and more unbreakable than ever. In the midst of the legal storm, we had to find a new kind of normal. Michael's lawyer had advised him that, for the sake of the custody case, it would be best if he and the children found their own place rather than staying with me indefinitely. It was a painful but necessary step. They found a small 2-bedroom rental apartment in a decent school district not far from me. It was a world away from the sprawling 4-bedroom house they had left behind, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was theirs. It was a sanctuary from the chaos. The first time my grandchildren stayed overnight with me in my apartment after Michael moved into his new place was a revelation. For 3 years, Jessica had always had an excuse why they couldn't. My apartment was too small, it wasn't childproof. I wouldn't know their routines. The real reason I now knew was that she couldn't control the narrative if they were with me. That Friday night, it felt like my little home came alive again. We made spaghetti and meatballs from scratch, Leo and Chloe standing on chairs beside me at the counter, their hands covered in flour. They giggled as they rolled the meatballs, making some comically large and others tiny. We ate at my small kitchen table, using the good dishes that I normally saved for special occasions. For the first time in years, a family meal felt like a celebration instead of a performance. Of course, the children had questions. Kids are smart. They absorb the tension around them even when they don't understand it. "Grandma," Leo said, his mouth full of spaghetti, "why doesn't Mommy live with us anymore?" I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times. Michael and I had agreed to be honest but age-appropriate. "Sometimes, honey," I said carefully, "grown-ups have problems that are too big to fix while they're living in the same house. Your mommy and daddy both love you very, very much, but they need to live in different places right now so they can work on their problems." "Is it because of money?" Chloe asked, her big brown eyes, so much like Michael's, looking at me with startling perception. "That's part of the grown-up problem, yes," I admitted. "But the most important thing for you to know is that none of this is your fault. Not one little bit. Your only job is to be a kid." "Mommy said you were mean to her," Leo said quietly, looking down at his plate. "She said that's why you don't come to our house anymore." My chest tightened. Even from a distance, Jessica was still trying to poison them. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. "What do you think, Leo?" I asked him gently. "Do I seem mean to you?" He thought about it for a long, serious moment. "No," he said finally. "You're not mean. You make us cookies and you came to my soccer game when Mommy said you were too sick." That night, after I tucked them into the beds in my spare room, surrounded by a fortress of stuffed animals, I sat in my living room and just listened to the sound of their soft breathing. I had missed this so much. Not just seeing them at holidays or for a few supervised hours. But this, the simple domestic joy of having them in my home, of being an integral trusted part of their lives. The next day we went to the farmer's market. It was something I had always wanted to do with them, but it had always been dismissed by Jessica as too crowded or too dirty. The kids were enthralled. Leo was mesmerized by a beekeeper selling honey, and Chloe spent 20 minutes talking to a woman who sold handmade soaps. We bought a huge bouquet of sunflowers that was almost as tall as she was. We didn't do anything expensive or fancy. We just walked, talked, and existed together, a small battered family learning how to be whole again. Looking at their happy faces, smeared with juice from the fresh peaches we bought, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Jessica had taken so much from us: money, security, trust. But she couldn't take this. She couldn't take the pure, uncomplicated love between a grandmother and her grandchildren. As we walked back to my car, Leo holding a bag of kettle corn and Chloe clutching her sunflowers, I knew we were going to be okay. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but we were walking it together. The months leading up to the final divorce hearing were agonizing. Jessica's legal team threw everything they had at us. They filed motions claiming Michael was an unfit father, that I was an unstable influence. They tried to argue that the $90,000 was a freely given gift, and that Jessica was entitled to significant alimony and child support to maintain the lifestyle the children were accustomed to. A lifestyle, our lawyer Ms. Albright dryly pointed out in her response, that was funded by fraud. The day we walked into the courthouse, my stomach was in knots. Michael, looking sharp and composed in a dark suit, squeezed my hand. "We have the truth on our side, Mom," he whispered. I hoped it would be enough. Jessica was already there, sitting with her lawyer. She was dressed in a conservative gray dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked like the victim, a sad, abandoned wife. She even managed to produce a few tears when the judge entered. It was a masterful performance. Her lawyer started, painting a picture of a woman who had given up her own career aspirations to be a devoted wife and mother, only to be controlled by her domineering mother-in-law and abandoned by her ungrateful husband. I had to clench my fists in my lap to keep from shouting out at the outrageous lies. Then it was Ms. Albright's turn. She was calm, methodical, and relentless. She didn't rely on theatrics. She relied on facts. First, she presented the bank statements, page after page of my transfers to Jessica's personal account. She had an accountant testify, showing how these funds were immediately spent on luxuries: designer handbags, spa days, expensive restaurant bills. Next, she presented the mountain of credit card debt Jessica had hidden from Michael. The judge, a stern-looking man in his 60s, frowned as he looked over the statements, his expression growing grimmer with each page. Then came the centerpiece of our case. Ms. Albright called a handwriting expert to the stand. She presented him with the $15,000 loan agreement and several examples of my actual signature from checks and legal documents. "In your expert opinion," Ms. Albright asked, "was the signature of Eleanor Vance on this loan agreement written by the same person who wrote these other signatures?" The expert adjusted his glasses. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "While it is a competent attempt at a forgery, there are clear and demonstrable inconsistencies in pressure, slant, and letter formation. The signature on the loan agreement is, without a doubt, a forgery." A gasp went through the small courtroom. Jessica went rigid in her chair. Ms. Albright wasn't finished. She called her final witness. "I call Mr. Davison to the stand." The school principal walked to the witness box. Ms. Albright had him recount the story of the anonymous phone call accusing me of being an unstable presence around children. She had him confirm that Jessica had lied to the school about a non-existent trust fund. By the time he was done, Jessica's carefully constructed image of a wronged victim was in tatters. She was exposed for what she was: a liar, a thief, and a fraud. When it was time for the judge to rule, he did not mince words. He looked directly at Jessica, his eyes cold as steel. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice booming in the quiet room. "In my 20 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated and cruel campaign of financial and emotional deception. You did not just mismanage your family's finances. You systematically exploited the generosity of your mother-in-law. You then committed fraud by forging her signature on a legal document. And when your schemes were discovered, You attempted to destroy her reputation and use your own children as pawns in your dispute. He shook his head in disgust. Your request for alimony is denied. Your claim to a lifestyle funded by deceit is frankly insulting to this court. He then delivered the final blow. Michael Vance is awarded sole legal and physical custody of the minor children, Leo and Chloe Vance. You, Mrs. Vance, will be granted supervised visitation every other weekend. Furthermore, this court is referring the matter of the forged loan document to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation. It was over. We had one. More than one. It was a total vindication. As we walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, Michael wrapped me in a hug. I could feel the tension of the last year finally drain out of him. I leaned my head on his shoulder and closed my eyes, taking my first deep, truly free breath in a very long time. We had justice. But I couldn't help but wonder, what was the price of a victory that came from such a devastating war? You see stories in movies where the moment the gavel falls, everything is suddenly perfect. The sun shines brighter, the music swells, and everyone lives happily ever after. Real life isn't like that. Winning in court didn't magically erase the scars. The months that followed were a testament to that. Michael was now a single father, juggling a demanding job with packing lunches, helping with homework, and dealing with bedtime tantrums. He was exhausted, but he was present in a way he hadn't been allowed to be for years. He sold the big empty house that had been a monument to Jessica's lies, and the proceeds barely covered the mountain of debt she had created. They moved into the small rental apartment, and their life became about rebuilding one day at a time. For the children, the healing was a more complicated journey. They were resilient as children are, but they were also hurting. Leo, my brave little soccer player, started acting out at school. His teacher said he was getting into fights, his frustration coming out in angry outbursts. Chloe, my sweet, sensitive girl, became quiet and withdrawn. She started having nightmares and would often cry for her mommy at night, which broke Michael's heart and mine. We knew we couldn't fix this on our own. We found a wonderful child therapist who started seeing them once a week. She gave them a safe space to talk about their big, confusing feelings. She gave Michael and me strategies to help them feel secure and loved amidst the turmoil. It was a slow process. There were good days and there were bad days. But slowly, inch by inch, we started to see the light return to their eyes. I too was on a journey of healing. For 3 years, my life had been defined by Jessica's needs. Her emergencies, her drama. My days had revolved around waiting for the next text, the next demand, the next subtle insult. Now there was just quiet. First, it was unnerving. I had forgotten who Eleanor Vance was when she wasn't being a secret benefactor or a silent victim. A friend of mine, Helen, who I had shamefully neglected during the worst of it, dragged me out of my apartment one Tuesday evening. "You're coming with me," she said, refusing to take no for an answer. "Pottery class. At the community center. You're going to get your hands dirty." I thought it was a ridiculous idea. But as I sat at the potter's wheel, the cool, wet clay spinning beneath my hands, something remarkable happened. The constant buzz of anxiety in my head started to fade. All I could think about was the shape taking form in front of me. I was creating something, not just fixing something that was broken. That first lopsided, wobbly bowl I made was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. That class opened a door for me. I started saying yes to things again. I rejoined my old book club. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children. I even started writing again just for myself, filling journals with thoughts and stories, a passion I had let go of after Richard died. I was rediscovering the woman I was before all the chaos, and I was surprised to find that I actually liked her very much. Our new family routine solidified. The kids would spend every other weekend with me, plus every Wednesday night for dinner. Wednesdays became our special night. We'd do homework at my kitchen table, then make dinner together and watch an old Disney movie. It was our simple, unbreakable tradition. During one of these visits, I saw Leo looking at the lopsided bowl from my pottery class, which I kept on my bookshelf. "You made that, Grandma?" he asked. "I did," I said, smiling. "It's not perfect," he said, with the blunt honesty of an 8-year-old. "No, it's not," I agreed. "It's a little bit broken, and a little bit messy, but I made it myself and I think it's strong. It can still hold beautiful things." He looked from the bowl to me, And for a moment, I think he understood. We were all a little bit broken, a little bit messy, but we were strong, and we were learning how to hold beautiful things again. Life settled into its new, quieter rhythm. The seasons changed. Fall turned to winter, and the first anniversary of that disastrous birthday dinner came and went, marked not with drama, but with a peaceful family dinner at Michael's apartment. We were healing. Jessica, for the most part, had become a ghost in our lives. Her supervised visits with the children were strained and awkward, according to the reports from the social worker. She would often cry or try to pump the kids for information about Michael and me, which only made them uncomfortable. The criminal investigation into the fraud case was proceeding slowly, a dark cloud on a distant horizon. I had stopped expecting to hear from her directly ever again. Then, a few days before Christmas, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simply my name, Eleanor. The sender's address was one I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to delete it, to not let her poison back into my life. But something made me pause. After a moment of hesitation, I clicked it open. The email was long. It was from Jessica. Eleanor, it began. I know there is absolutely no reason for you to read this. And I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm not even sure why I'm writing, other than the fact that my therapist said that owning your truth is the first step. And the truth is, I owe you an apology. My eyes scanned the words, my heart starting to beat a little faster. There are no excuses for what I did, she wrote. But there are reasons. I grew up with nothing, and I was so terrified of going back to that. I became obsessed with having the perfect life, the big house, the nice car, the private schools. I was so insecure, so desperate to prove to everyone, and to myself, that I had made it. When I saw how much you loved Michael and the kids, and I knew you had the inheritance money, I saw a solution. It started small, but the lies grew, and I had to keep telling bigger lies to cover them up. I became a person I didn't even recognize. I was a monster to you. I was cruel and manipulative, and I used your love as a weapon. The things I said, especially about your husband, there is no apology deep enough to cover that. I was lashing out from a place of pure panic and self-hatred. I was watching my perfect world crumble. And I wanted to make you feel as terrible as I did. It was unforgivable. The court-ordered therapy has been difficult. It's hard to look at the ugly parts of yourself. The DA is offering a plea bargain on the fraud charge, probation and restitution, if I plead guilty. I'm going to take it. I have to start paying for my mistakes, literally and figuratively. I just wanted you to know that. And I wanted to say, for what it's worth, that I am sorry. Not because I got caught, but because what I did was wrong. You were nothing but kind to me, and I repaid that kindness with betrayal. I hope you and the children have a good Christmas. They deserve all the happiness in the world. And you deserve peace. I read the email 3 times. There were no requests, no hidden manipulations. It was raw, honest, and filled with a despair that felt genuine. The angry, entitled woman from the restaurant and the courthouse was gone. In her place was someone broken, and perhaps, finally starting to face the consequences of her actions. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a profound, quiet sadness. A sadness for the family we could have been. For the years lost to deceit. For the pain everyone had endured. I sat there for a long time, looking at the blinking cursor on the screen. A part of me wanted to write back, to say something. But what was there to say? I moved the mouse, clicked on the email, and dragged it into the trash folder. Forgiveness isn't about saying it's okay. It isn't about reconciliation. Sometimes I realized forgiveness is about accepting an apology you never thought you'd get, acknowledging the humanity in the person who hurt you, and then quietly closing the door, not out of anger but for the sake of your own peace. 1 year later. It was Christmas morning again. This time there was no fancy restaurant, no underlying tension. There was just the warm, cozy chaos of my little apartment, filled with the scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee. Snow was falling softly outside my window, blanketing Columbus in a thick layer of white. Leo and Chloe were in their pajamas, ripping open presents with joyous abandon. Michael was sitting on the floor with them, a genuine, relaxed smile on his face. He had survived the bankruptcy that had been the inevitable result of Jessica's spending, and he was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding his credit and his life. He was working hard, but he told me he slept better at night than he had in years. There were no more secrets. The gifts weren't extravagant. For Leo, a new soccer ball and a biography of his favorite player. For Chloe, a large set of art supplies and a book on how to draw animals. For me, a beautiful framed photo of the three of them taken at a park that fall. It was the most precious gift I had ever received. As Chloe sat on the floor, carefully sketching a picture of our cat in her new notepad, she looked up at me, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. "Grandma," she said, her expression serious. "Are you happier now?" The question, so simple and direct, caught me off guard. But the answer came without a moment's hesitation. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I am much, much happier." "Good," she said, nodding sagely before returning to her drawing. "Because you smile more. Before, when Mommy lived with us, you always looked worried." Out of the mouths of babes. She had seen what I had tried so hard to hide. The constant anxiety, the feeling of walking on eggshells, the weight of being tolerated instead of being loved. Later that afternoon, after the presents were opened and the kids were happily occupied, Michael came and sat beside me on the sofa. We watched the snow fall in comfortable silence for a moment. "I got a letter from Jessica last week," he said quietly. I looked at him, waiting. "She's completed her probation," he said. "She's still in therapy. She has a steady job." She asked if maybe someday she could take the kids for an unsupervised lunch. Just for an hour or two. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her not yet," he said, shaking his head. "But maybe. Someday. She's their mother. I can't erase that. But they deserve a mother who is healthy. And I need to know for sure that she is." He looked at me, his eyes full of gratitude. "The kids are so happy, Mom. They're thriving. Because they have stability. Because they have you." I looked around my small living room. At my grandson, building an elaborate Lego castle. At my granddaughter lost in her art. At my son, who had weathered an unimaginable storm and come out the other side stronger and wiser. I thought about my pottery class, my book club, my volunteer work. My life wasn't large or glamorous. I didn't have a big house or an expensive car. But my life was rich. It was filled to the brim with things money could never buy. Laughter, trust, honesty, and a deep, abiding love that had been tested by fire and had come out unbreakable. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. That your value doesn't come from your bank account or what you can provide for others. It comes from who you are. It comes from the kindness you show, the wisdom you share, and the love you give freely without expecting anything in return. The woman who had hissed those cruel words at me at my birthday dinner had been trying to make me feel worthless. But in the end, she had given me the greatest gift of all. She had forced me to rediscover my own worth. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I know many of you have faced your own battles with family, betrayal, and finding your strength again. I have one question for you all. What's one piece of advice you would give to someone who feels like their kindness is being taken for granted? Please share your wisdom in the comments below. I know your words can help someone else who is struggling. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of life, loss, and the incredible strength we find within ourselves.